Welcome to episode 2 of Stanley Spector, the Post Office Drum Teacher. In episode 1, we learned that Stanley hailed out of New York and started teaching internationally in the 60s. What you see on your screen is an example of modern drum lessons. They're available on YouTube and other platforms. So how did Stanley manage to do it in the 60s? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. Hi, I'm Wayne from In Time with Music, and we're just going to run through a slideshow. And I'd mentioned that I was going to go back to 1977, but I did learn a lot more about Stanley, and I've decided to go back to 1960 when he started advertising in International Musician magazine.
One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
Now, this is a February 1960 issue of International Musician, and this is Modern Drummer didn't really start until 1977. So this was the conduit for musicians all over the world. And that's the ad that Stanley had. I'll give you a little bit bigger so you can see it, a bigger view. There you have it. Stanley Spector, the originator and teacher of method jazz drumming. Gives private instruction both in New York City and Boston. Interview only by appointment. Jake Hanna, drummer for Marion McPartland, has been trained by Stanley Spector through the discipline of method jazz drumming. What is method jazz drumming? Well, we're going to get to that more in the next episode. But right now we're going to look at how he managed to reach all of these students. So, as well as International Musician magazine, Stanley advertised extensively in Downbeat. This is a December 28th, 1967 edition. And this was his ad, but it was an ad written in third person. So it says, from Boston, Bobby Clark says, I've tried to improve my performance as a drummer in 3 ways. First, through the study of conventional drum methods. Second, through trying to do it myself on the basis of feeling natural talent and just plain nerve. Third, through personal study with Stanley Spector. I found out that for me, the conventional methods did not carry over the actual playing experience. And in fact, I think they inhibited a great deal of feeling that I had before taking conventional drum lessons. I found that doing it on the basis of natural talent, I picked up the worst habits of the best drummers and only the best habits of the worst drummers. It was only with the direction that I got from Stan that I was able to approach the making of music on a drum set in a way that gave me an artistic experience of high excitement that went far beyond anything I could have expected or anticipated before I began to study at the Stanley Spector School of Drumming. So there you have it, 1967 Downbeat ad. So here we have March 7th, 1968. And there's Stanley's little ad there at the bottom. Now you'll notice all the drum ads. That's because, remember, Modern Drummer didn't exist. And of course, no internet. So this was the home for not just drummers, but all musicians were... I think Downbeat's still actually in print. So here's what that little tiny ad said. Stanley Spector writes, I suspect that the last thing a beginning drummer has need of is a drum teacher. I'm not putting you on. The only education that has real significance is self-education. And with this thought in mind, I would recommend that a beginner exercise and stretch his own native talents to find out how much he could learn on his own. What he does need is a set of drums, a collection of jazz and rock recordings, and an opportunity to watch drummers in action. Through such moons, he will be... the language was different back in the 60s. Through such means, he will be able to acquire information upon which he may act, even though, in more cases than not, this approach will eventually break down. The romantic beginning is desirable, necessary, and even helpful. When it does break down, some drummers have discovered that the pleasures of self-education can be established again on a second and higher level of experience through the program of study offered in the Stanley Spector School of Drumming. Okay, so that brings us to an interesting letter. I know you can't read it, so I'll have to read it to you. This is in the Chords and Discords section, which was an open letter section for readers of Downbeat magazine. And this is the beginning of the controversial time between Stanley Spector and Buddy Rich. Some of you may know what I'm talking about here, but instead of Stanley putting an ad in, he actually wrote in a letter to the magazine. And it's called A Fishtail. He titled it A Fishtail. And this is the letter. Buddy Rich is reported to have stated that he never took a drum lesson in his life. That he took to drumming like a fish takes to water, so to speak. Really? If one understands Buddy the R and his special background, he probably had more man-hours of the only relevant drum instruction available in his time than any other drummer who ever appeared in public. In fact, you could say that his childhood was one perpetual drum lesson. As I understand it, Rich's parents were in vaudeville and toured the country with son Buddy in tow. Master Rich had the opportunity, the time and the interest to sit in the front row of theaters and take daily drum lessons by watching and talking with every first-rate pit drummer in America. Apparently, when your total environment has been a drumming school, the tendency is not to take notice that you ever attended classes. Does the fish notice that his environment is water? I am grateful and appreciative that Buddy Rich elected the social acceptable activity of drumming as an outlet for his feelings. That he was able to channel his robust energies and excel as a virtuoso performer is something for which historical jazz and even American civilization perhaps is the richer. Alas, even with Mrs. Gianissimo's confidence in my professional abilities as a teacher, Chords, January 11th, that's a different issue of Downbeat, I feel that communication between Buddy Rich and myself would be hampered by one aspect of the generation gap. Buddy was a lot older than Stanley Spector. At the time he wrote this, I believe he was about, I think he was about 43. Anyway, but having Ringo as a drum student, that would be a gas. Signed, Stanley Spector, New York City. So, started a bit of a controversy with Downbeat, because what I didn't tell you, what I'm about to tell you, was that in the December before this March letter, Downbeat interviewed Buddy Rich. And after the interview, someone else wrote into Downbeat magazine, and that was Martha Gianissimo, who Stanley just referred to. And Martha wrote in and said, I'd like to inform Rich that Max Roach is a teacher who knows much more than he will ever know about playing music on the drums. She's talking about Buddy, right? Also, I'd recommend to Rich some fine New York drummers, such as Billy Higgins, Joe Chambers, Leo Morris, who are all half of Rich's age and much more impeccable even so. For a conclusion, since I assume Roach's time is limited to his playing engagements, I'd suggest that Rich take lessons from Stanley Spector, a fine teacher who knows a great deal about keeping jazz time. Then perhaps he can work on his basic problem of being an extremely insecure individual. Whew. Ha, 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 ha. So that's heating things up, right? So what we have to do now is we have to go and look at the Buddy Rich interview. Here we go. I think this is it. January 11th, 1968, Downbeat. Oh, I'm ahead of myself. Nope, that's Martha Giannissio's letter. Here we have it. December 14th, 1967, Downbeat. In the interview with Buddy Rich. Now, I've met Buddy. I've spent time with Buddy Rich. And anybody here that has knows that he's a bit of a jokester. And sometimes people don't really get his jokes. Buddy was pretty funny. And I have the article in front of me that you can see, and I know it's really hard for you can't really read much. So I'll just go through this little section here at the bottom, and you can see what I mean. First of all, Buddy was interviewed at this is about a drum clinic that he put on. And Buddy was 45 minutes late getting there, showing up for the clinic. And so anyway, the first question that was thrown at him was, "How long have you been playing, Buddy?" And he said, "I just arrived. I haven't played at all yet." And the next question was, "Have you ever taken lessons?" "I never found a teacher who knew more than me." "Why do you always play on the outside of your snare?" "Because I never found anything good on the inside." You got to be a drummer. "If you think Belson is great, why don't you use 2 bass drums like he does?" "Because I can do everything he does with 1. So you see where this is going. Then they ask him about Max Roach. Then in January, the letters poured in, some pro and some against Buddy. And that Giannisio lady, Martha Giannisio, was one of the against. And so that goes back to Stanley when he wrote in about the fishtail. That's what spurred that whole letter from Stanley Spector. So that brings us up to May 15th, 1969 for the Downbeat issue that interviewed Stanley. You know, by then he'd invested 10 years of advertising, and they decided to do an interview, and they called it Stanley Spector, Drum Guru, and it was by Ira Gittler. I'll give you a little bit more information once I get this organized. We might as well look at the actual magazine itself. So, it was quite an extensive article. Starts on page 22, continues on page 35. And it really covers his history. You know, at that time, Stanley was still working in Boston as an orchestral player, and he was also working in New York. So that's why he had a teaching studio in Boston and New York at the same time. He was going back and forth. But his training was really classical. And in New York, he was approached by a lot of students that wanted to learn jazz. So I'll just read you a little bit about what Ira has said in this article. 10 years ago, Spector made a teaching record with written instructions. So we're talking 1959, the record was made, which made it possible for me to establish a vehicle for direct two-way communication between individual drummers and myself. It is interesting to note that the instructional recording paralleled the freestyle of a cymbal playing characteristic similar to Elvin Jones and Tony Williams, if not anticipating it. Spector has now programmed an extensive taped course and can carry on a weekly dialogue with a drummer anywhere in the world. A drummer qualifies through an examination based on the initial instructional materials. Once in the course, the environment situation can be extended to a qualified drummer anywhere. Whether a student is taking the home study course or studying directly with me in my studio, he is in fact building a symbolic jazz environment in his room. When he goes out to play, he is moving from one kind of jazz environment to another. He is moving from one performance to performance rather than from practice to performance. In the studio, Spector becomes the symbolic audience. Like a non-directive therapist, he remains silent for the most part. I don't answer too many questions, he said. I tell them that I think he already has the information and that he has to use his ability for recall. Of course, if it is too far off, I'll correct him. A student has to develop the confidence that comes with his knowing and feeling that he is right. Putting things into perspective, In 1969, Frank Sinatra would have been 53. Stanley was actually the same age as Sammy Davis Jr. at that time. Let's move ahead. Let's skip ahead 8 years, and I'll move you up to 1977, where I promised, which is why I wore this shirt. August 11th, 1977. So you notice Stanley's ad has shrunk. I'll read it to you. But his advertising shrunk. Now, in 1977, there's a good reason for that. Modern Drummer magazine had come out. So Stanley spread out pretty thin. There's International Musician, still popular. Downbeat, still popular. And Modern Drummer. And by now, he's got his home study course in full play. Here's his ad. Drum instruction. Positive results within 6 weeks. The musicians you play with will notice a difference. Our students are among the most successful drummers in America. A revolutionary method taught in Manhattan or through a tape-recorded home study course. For information, including a 20-minute recording, send $1 to the Stanley Spector Studio School of Drumming. You notice I said $1. Because I got ripped off. So we'll move on. So, Modern Drummer comes out. First issue, January 1977. Buddy's on the cover. Nope, Stanley's not in it. So, he's still in Downbeat. Stanley doesn't show up until the 10th issue of Modern Drummer. And there it is, March 1979. So he's now he's in both Downbeat and Modern Drummer. At least I think he was, he was still in Downbeat. So let's have a look at his Modern Drummer ad. Now, 1979, 2 years actually later than the Downbeat ad I just showed you. I'm Stanley Spector, and I can improve your drumming within 6 weeks. The musicians you play with will notice a difference. My students are among the most successful drummers in America. My revolutionary method is taught in Manhattan or through a tape-recorded home study course. For information and proof of success, including a 20-minute recording, send $2 to the Stanley Spector School of Drumming. He got $2 from me. I should have ordered it out of Downbeat. Actually, I think I did, but I paid the $2 anyway. But the only difference between this and the Downbeat ad is his photograph is in there. So let's update our photograph of young Stanley. So here he is. When he enrolled in his program, we became one of his students. He, at least for me, sent me an autographed photograph. And in this photograph, he's in his. I had to look and see. He's in his mid-50s. He looks so different. He just let's look at this. 34 and mid-50s. 34. No, that's 43. I'm sorry. I don't have a 34, an age 34 photograph from 1960. So this is 1969 at age 43. 1977, mid-50s.
Get your heart going. All right, one more time now. Are you ready? Come on, baby. Come on with me. Come on, baby. Come on down with me, girl. Come on, baby. Come on with me. Come Thank you.
I checked my collection. The oldest issue of Modern Drummer I have left in my collection is this one. It's issue 6, number 6, and 1978 issue with Carmine on the cover. But nope, Stanley is definitely not advertising in this issue. His first ad, here we go, his first ad was this one here. Now, this one, I believe this is the 10th issue. And Ron at Modern Drummer magazine decided to include an interview with Stanley in this magazine. Actually, it wasn't, I'm sorry, correction, it wasn't an interview. Stanley submitted his own article. And by this time, he was getting quite controversial as far as his teaching methods went, because he wasn't pushing traditional classical or rudimental or any of that technical training. Stanley, by now, had moved into time. And we'll get more into that in the next episode, because this could go on. I don't want to talk for 10 years about Stanley Spector. But anyway, this magazine was the issue where he was interviewed. Here's his article, Stanley Spector, Challenging the Rudimental System. Probably I'll get into a little bit of this article in the next episode, because the next episode will be on his actual methods, his teaching methods, not how he got to his potential customers. It was quite a long article, a couple of pages. And that brings us to the end of how Stanley did it. This photograph here is how people are doing it today. I've had interactions with lots of different people in this. I've been blessed to have worked with many of the musical icons over the years. And I can tell you there's some really good instruction there. But as someone who's also taught for almost 3 decades, you can't really beat in-person teaching. You can learn a lot more, by studying with various people. But there's some things that are hard to teach unless you're actually standing right there with your student. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this gave you an idea of how Stanley reached the drummers all throughout the world. And in the next episode, I'll show you a little bit about his teaching methods and why some of them may have made him a little bit controversial. Well, thank you very much for watching episode 2. Now you know who Stanley Spector was and just how he did it. So in the next episode, we're going to look at the methods themselves. We're going to look at the materials, what happened after you sent in for the initial package, and then what happens after you start the 6-week course, and then what happens after that. We'll talk about that in the next episode 3. Thanks very much for watching. There should be a link to episode 3 coming up at the end of this episode. This next one is Duris Maxwell. Now, Duris was a student of Jim Blackley's. Duris is a groove master. And I did an interview with him around 1985, so I'll let you hear a little bit of his approach a long time after he would have studied with Blackley probably around the early 70s, somewhere 1970 to 73 in there maybe, or even earlier than that. I don't know when he moved to Vancouver. I know I met Blackley in Drum Village a couple of times in Vancouver in 1973, 1974. I think Duris would have been taking lessons before that. Anyway, let's have a listen.
Basically, if you can't make the thing feel like something, it has to feel tremendous. You have to have a capacity to have a repeatable action to the extent that you can lay down an absolutely mesmerizing feel. And the less you get in its way, in other words, the less crap you play on top of it and fills and so forth, the better usually. Mm-hmm. And knowing how to put the right touch at the right time is a higher art than being able to combine 100,000 notes over the course of an evening. And just being able to play really good time really well is something that is so difficult that I think a younger player usually can't even comprehend it. And and older players are continually having to remind themselves that being able to play simply and with the right balance in between the bass drum, the snare drum, the hat, and all your cymbals and whatever, everything reading out to basically the same intensity, and to have the thing flowing, and to be it musical, and to know how to set verses and choruses up, and to really listen and not get preoccupied with your own trip, to relate to the other people musically. That's something that you'll perfect for the rest of your life.